In this video, I'll be offering you my review of the Meike 55mm f1.4 autofocus lens. Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel. In this video, I'm going to be talking you through my experience with the Meike 55mm f1.4 autofocus lens for Fujifilm X. Now, 55mm is, in the real world, effectively the same focal length as 56mm, so I'm going to make a couple of references to Fujifilm's own XF 56mm f1.2 lenses here. But if you would like to see this lens compared to some of the other budget offerings out there, do get subscribed, as I have a video coming in a couple of weeks' time where I'll be comparing six 56mm lenses head to head. For now though, let's talk about this lens from Meike. Now, as always, before we get started, a little bit of a disclaimer. This lens was sent to me by Meike for testing and review, but they don't have any input at all on this review. Now, all thoughts here are my own, and their team will be watching it as it premieres, just like you guys. So let's see if it's worthy of our attention. The build quality of the 55mm is very, very good overall, but it does feel like it could use a little refinement. Now, in places it feels very, very high quality, and then there are just some details that remind you that it's not a premium offering. Now, the choice of materials is where this is sort of most noticeable. It feels very robust, but not particularly refined. Each section of the lens feels like it's sort of been constructed from a different material, and they don't really fit together as harmoniously as some other lenses. The main shell looks and feels like some sort of a composite material, while the focus ring and the aperture ring feel like they're made of aluminium. Now, when I asked Meike, I was told that the lens is constructed from metal and plastic. So the focus ring and the aperture ring are very, very heavily knurled, and it makes them feel a little bit scratchy at times, but they definitely get the job done, even with sweaty fingers, even though they don't feel as nice and refined as, for example, some of Fujifilm's ones. The focus ring turns smoothly with good resistance, so for those who like to manual focus, this should be a good experience. Now, it does seem to be tuned so that it's got a very long throw, however, so large changes in focus can take a while, and precise focusing for smaller changes is much easier though. The aperture ring is clicked to 1/3 stops and feels very, very definite in its movement. Each stop has a very solid hold that doesn't get knocked while it's in your bag, like some of Fujifilm's looser feeling aperture rings, so well done on this one, Meike. On the side of the lens barrel, there's also an autofocus manual focus switch. Now, presumably this is a carryover from some of the other systems the lens is offered for, because most Fujifilm bodies have an AFM switch on them anyway that's very easily accessible, so that's just a little bit redundant here. Moving to the front of the lens, in a bit of an odd move, the filter thread doesn't actually go all the way around the lens barrel. It's sort of divided into 4 parts, and that just feels like cross-threading waiting to happen to me. So when you're twisting a filter on, it just pays to be a little bit more careful so that you don't catch it in between and maybe cross-thread the filter. So it's also not great when it comes to cleaning the lens, because any microfiber or tissues that you use just end up getting caught on these threads and either ripping the tissue or pulling threads out of the microfiber. So overall, not a great design on that one. But down to the mount. Now, the mount is very well machined, and it glides onto the camera body very, very smoothly. It has this red rubber gasket here for a little extra weather resistance, but as far as I could find, this is the only point of weather sealing on the lens. Now, the included rear cap is another one of those custom ones that doesn't fit all that well onto other lenses, so I really wish that third-party companies would stop doing this and just make ones that fit on all of your lenses. Overall though, the lens is very well built, especially for the price, and feels good in the hand. It's small, it's light at a quoted 286 grams, and it balances well even on small bodies like my X-T50. Autofocus on this lens, much like a lot of this new wave of autofocus lenses we're seeing from third-party manufacturers, is driven by a stepping motor. Now, it's quiet and it's mostly very, very fast. When making small adjustments, say from here to here, it's very, very good and you barely even notice it moving. But when you have to make large adjustments, like from minimum focus all the way out to infinity, it can take a little bit longer to get there. But when it does get there though, it's very accurate, and it also tracks very well in AFC. One thing I have noticed though is that it can hunt a little bit, just sort of randomly from time to time. Even in bright and contrasty light, I've seen it just sort of swing back and forth trying to figure out what to focus on. So hopefully this is something that Meike can tune in a future firmware update. But overall, it's not the most refined implementation of a stepping motor that I've seen, but it still beats Fujifilm's choice of a DC coreless motor in any situation. Images shot wide open with this lens are quite sharp in the central area of the frame. They're very good and definitely usable for most purposes, but they're not great. From memory, I would say that wide open this lens is about on par with Fujifilm's original XF56mm f1.2, but a bit behind the new one. By f2 though, the lens is really good at delivering detail and I'd be happy to use it for anything that I shoot. When it comes to the corners, they're quite soft wide open and they don't improve too much until around f4. By that time, they're definitely usable, and by f8, they're very good. Meike are very honest on their sales page and say that CA is high with this lens, and they are not joking. You can see it quite significantly in a lot of situations. Now, in high contrast scenes, it shows up around edges, and it can be seen without even zooming in at times. Even in low contrast scenes, though, we come across it in any sharp transitions in tones. Also, be sure to look out for it in the bokeh section, as we can see it very clearly there as well. Flare seems quite well controlled by this lens, with minimal contrast loss at most angles. Now, occasionally if light hits it just right, you completely lose contrast, but most of the time I haven't noticed it really being a problem. However, ghosting shows up in these sort of concentric patterns all the way across the frame, and with third-party lenses I'm always on the lookout for, something interesting when it comes to flare and ghosting, but with this lens I couldn't really make it work for myself, so I've just been avoiding it. Bokeh is quite good, and I haven't noticed it being particularly ugly in any situation I've used the lens in. At night it produces round bokeh balls towards the center of the frame and a little bit of cat's eye pattern towards the corners. As the lens is stopped down, the 9 aperture blades become visible in the shape of the pin light. When it comes to real-world bokeh though, I've noticed some nervousness in out-of-focus foliage, but nothing too serious. Most of the time it's quite good, and I haven't found it distracting me from my subject in any of my images. In city scenes, we see a little bit more of this nervousness, where we have a lot of straight lines going across the frame, and also the CA tends to show up around those as well, which contributes to the bokeh not being quite as pleasant as it could be. But in most situations, I've found that the out-of-focus areas don't really distract from the subject in any way. Wide open, there's a deep vignette that's around 1 1/3 stops darker in the corners than in the center of the frame, and this gradually improves until f5.6, where the vignette is basically imperceptible, and Capture One does quite a good job of reducing the vignette with a single slider, so I haven't really found it to be a problem. Sunstars begin to be visible around f4 with this lens, and they get slightly larger as the aperture is stopped down. Now, they're not particularly defined and they don't really draw attention to themselves, so if you love those big, bold sunstars, this lens is probably not the right choice for creating them. Like any lens in this focal range, the Meike 55mm is likely to see quite a bit of use by portrait photographers. Now, it definitely delivers in this department with good sharpness, quite nice bokeh, and rapid autofocus. And it's definitely better at capturing those fleeting moments in a portrait session than Fujifilm's own XF offering, as it's able to focus more quickly, and mostly without hunting. So it also delivers a nice warm-toned image with a good level of magenta that provides a really good starting point for editing portraits, in my opinion. What I've been using this lens for mostly though is just as a walk around. So whenever I get a new lens, I like to take it out and just sort of aimlessly walk and photograph the things that catch my attention, and in that way I can get a feeling for how the lens performs in a general sense, and what the images coming out of it are going to look like. And during those walks I've noticed that the autofocus performs mostly well, as I mentioned earlier, and I haven't noticed any missed focus at all. But you do really want to have the lens focused in the ballpark of where you're going to have it focusing, to get the fastest autofocus possible. It's almost instantaneous when the lens is very close to what it needs to focus on, but when it has to rack from front to back, it can take a little while to move all the elements around. Tracking also works really well, and I've had no issues tracking people walking or riding bicycles. Now, once the lens finds its target, it sticks like glue, and I haven't noticed any out-of-focus frames in the short bursts of tracking that I've done. Now, this would be great for, portraits of children or other erratic subjects where you really need all the help you can get in focusing on them. Now, speaking of children, I would love to use this lens in my family sessions for its great autofocus and its really good sharpness, but a couple of things hold me back, and the first is the bokeh. When there are a lot of straight lines in the frames, it can get just a little bit messy, and also the CA is just a little bit too significant for delivering to a client, for me. For day-to-day shooting though, this lens is plenty good enough, and I've been really happy with the images that I've got from it. All in all, this is a great first autofocus offering for the Fujifilm X system from Meike. Images are sharp, especially towards the central area of the frame, and the lens has great autofocus. It's also quite well built and is lightweight and compact, which means it matches really well with some of the smaller Fujifilm bodies. And Bokeh is also mostly good, but it can be a little bit jittery at times. However, the images do suffer quite heavily from chromatic aberration, and there's not a lot that you can do about that. One thing I would like to see improved, if possible, is the autofocus when you have to make large changes in focus distance. Hopefully that's something that Meike can achieve in firmware. As always though, I hope you've enjoyed this review and got the information that you came for. If there's anything else you'd like to know about this lens, please do leave your questions in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for my upcoming 56mm lens showdown. For now though, enjoy the slideshow, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.